and welcome to my channel. My name is Laura Gibson Cuddy. I'm a retired chef, former art teacher, and author of mystery novels and children's literature. Join me as we find the art in life. Today, we're going to be tackling Pride and Prejudice, one of my favorite novels by Jane Austen. We're going to dissect the character of Mr. Darcy. What do you picture when I say his name? What did Jane Austen intend for us to think? Why does no one seem to get the full scope of his character? These are the questions I'm going to tackle today as we take a closer look at the dashing and misunderstood Mr. Darcy. Whether you've seen only the most recent adaptation of this famous novel, starring Keira Knightley, or you've seen the multitude of BBC versions of this novel, or you've, like me, read this a million times, or at least a dozen times, you most likely have at least heard of Pride and Prejudice, and you've also heard of Mr. Darcy. Now, I asked my friends at Instagram and Twitter, what comes to mind when you hear his name? Funny enough, no one actually described any physical attributes of Darcy. The most common were cocky, intense, arrogant, haughty, stubborn, bullheaded, quick to judge, yet romantic. On Twitter, more people chose to describe him as an average and cocky person over talking about his handsome features. Why is that? Now, before we dive into this, I want us to look at how Jane Austen chose to introduce this character to us. Now, Jane Austen first introduces Darcy in the middle of chapter 3 of Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance, of his having 10,000 a year. The gentlemen pronounced him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley, and he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity. For he was discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased, and not all of his large estate in Derbyshire could then save him from having a most formidable, disagreeable countenance, and being unworthy of being compared to his friend. Interesting enough, she also goes on to say about how Mr. Darcy danced only once with Mrs. Hurst and once with Miss Bingley, declined being introduced to any other ladies, and spent the rest of the evening in walking about the room, speaking occasionally to one of his party. His character was then decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. Amongst the most violent against him was Mrs. Bennet, whose dislike of his general behavior was sharpened into particular resentment by his having slighted one of his daughters. Now, we all of a sudden have a sense of his character to be proud, haughty, intense, and all around disagreeable, with just a few words. But Jane Austen initially described him as being handsome and fine and being of great means. So why aren't these the lasting thoughts that we have? Instead, we have this overwhelming sense of his negative attributes, and not just negative attributes, what his personality is above his physical description, because she paints a picture with feeling, not just in words, but in showing the feeling that he has throughout the room, which goes on all throughout the novel. we see certain situations that we see through the eyes of Elizabeth Bennet and the other Bennet sisters, and even the mother, where he has to be the prideful one because of what happens. And in turn, we have this lasting impression, but yet, how come he is the most desired after character in literature? Even by me. I mean, he wants Elizabeth more than anything else toward the end. And don't we all desire that in a significant other? Do these desires then take hold of the negativity and wash that away? Jane Austen just takes a few short paragraphs to get a sense of emotion in the reader, of negative feeling toward the main male character, Mr. Darcy. But it takes her the whole rest of the book to change that initial reaction of the reader. Through events in the book, we discover that Mr. Darcy might not have been as prideful as we once thought. He actually might have been the prejudiced one, and Elizabeth the prideful one. But we get a sense of the quiet, noble character that he is when he helps Elizabeth through different situations, just proclaiming his love through actions. Yet, based on these polls and these reactions, their initial thoughts are in the negative toward Darcy. Why is this? It's because the author paints such a vivid initial picture that it is hard to wash that away. It's such a vibrant color, that red, intense color of pride, of this reaction of, oh, I am not going to dance with Elizabeth here, even though I'm attracted to her. He is not going to dance with her. And that initial reaction immediately gets the reader to think, why would Elizabeth desire such a haughty character? Even when she's describing her love to her sister later on, and her sister goes, well, when did your feelings change towards this prideful man? And she actually says, I dare say it started when I saw his gorgeous grounds at Pemberley. And then she quickly has to explain to her sister, well, it's not because of his wealth, though. It's because of all these other things. What would have happened if Darcy had been poor? What would have happened if Mr. Darcy had not the means? What if she hadn't seen Pemberley? Would she then have changed her mind at all about Darcy? I actually think the answer is most likely no. She wouldn't have, because she would not have gotten a chance to see his character, because the character came out when he helped her sister through means of his money. When he gave her a tour of his grounds, because she went there, seeing as it was such a grand estate. I wonder if Elizabeth would have settled for Mr. Darcy. Next week, I'm going to dive into the character of Elizabeth and see what kind of a picture Austen paints of her. Why this then becomes a romance desired after. Because I don't think the answer lies with Mr. Darcy. I think the answer lies with Elizabeth Bennet. Why do we love this character of Mr. Darcy when we're given such a vivid painting of his pride and prejudice? So stay tuned next week when I dissect the art of Elizabeth Bennet. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my video. New content every Thursday where I find the art in life.